Some of these victims he dated multiple times before he killed them.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're discussing some of the horrific true crime cases where the victims were singled out due to their working in the sex trade.
These people were not conscious, they weren't mobile, they weren't able to protect themselves, and they were engaging in sexual acts against their will.
The New Bedford highway killer.
Boyle says some detectives wondered if the killer intentionally dumped the bodies outside New Bedford city limits so New Bedford police wouldn't have jurisdiction over the crimes.
Criminologists and other experts have come up with varying hypotheses regarding exactly why those in the sex trade are often targeted by serial killers. Some claim the demonization of this oldest profession is one reason, while others point to either laissez-faire police procedure or the victim's ease of access and anonymity. No one at the time of this writing has been brought to justice for the highway killings that shocked areas near New Bedford, Massachusetts back in the late 80s.
You had the remains of woman after woman after a woman found along the two highways, similar situations, similar backgrounds.
10 official victims have been attributed to the New Bedford highway killer, women who all either worked in the sex industry or battled substance use disorder.
There have been other suspects, but no arrests.
I'm very, very surprised that this case has not been solved.
The Butcher Baker.
The interrogation room was ready for him. The goal was to keep him off balance, hoping to elicit a confession and avoid a lengthy legal case.
It's unclear as to why so many news outlets and members of the media choose to attach monikers such as the Butcher Baker to killers like Robert Hansen. The man's otherwise unassuming name doesn't exactly bring to mind the shocking brutality of his crimes. Yet Hansen was allegedly responsible for attacking at least 17 women in the area of Anchorage, Alaska during a 10-plus year rampage.
I was watching national news, and there was Bob Hansen. And I thought, what the hell is Bob Hansen doing on national news? And I turned it up, and it said, this is the greatest mass murder in the history of Alaska.
Many of his victims were involved in sex work. His nickname of the Butcher Baker was connected to a family confectionery business, but Hansen's methods of execution were anything but sweet. He would often drag out the process, taking his victims to remote locations before releasing them into the wild, where they would be hunted by Hansen.
I know what you did to those girls, and I'm gonna prove it.
It's gonna be hard, Sergeant. I heard you were leaving.
Dr. No. There should be no confusing the very real-life case of this notorious Ohio serial killer to the fictional James Bond villain of the same name.
I only gratify your curiosity because you're the one man I've met capable of appreciating what I've done and keeping it to himself.
There's also some additional confusion with regards to whether or not Samuel Legg's 2019 arrest on unrelated murder charges might just connect the latter to Ohio's unsolved Dr. No murders from the 1980s. These killings focused upon runaways, hitchhikers, and truck stop sex workers, professionals that would then be abducted and strangled off-site. Legg was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial in 2023, and it remains to be seen whether or not any closure will be brought to these cold cases. The Sunset Strip Killers.
Detectives later found out that Bundy would go from trying to blow the whistle on Clark to the other extreme, as she began to involve herself in Clark's twisted pastime.
The grisly details that can be taken away from the Sunset Strip murder read like something out of a horror or exploitation movie. Doug Clark and his lover Carol Mary Bundy let their own sexual fantasies evolve into real-world thrill killings. These were usually at the expense of sex workers, whose remains would often be defiled and debased by both Clark and Bundy.
He sees all women as sex workers. These were just two teenage girls, and both of them ended up dying.
Moreover, some of the victims had their heads removed and stored by the couple in their home. They even applied makeup to the head of one victim, Exie Wilson, before bringing it home as a part of the pair's sick and twisted crimes.
You know anything about rigor mortis? Anybody in the room, show of hands. Anybody heard of rigor mortis? A jaw locked like this, frozen, supposedly?
David Smith. It was the Criminal Justice Act of 2003 that allowed British killer David Smith to be retried in 2023 for the 1993 murder of a sex worker named Sarah Crump. This second time proved to be the charm with regards to achieving a guilty verdict, but it tragically was not the only time Smith would be convicted of killing other workers in this industry. Smith was found guilty in 1999 for a similarly brutal and brazen murder, specifically that of Amanda Walker. He's currently incarcerated and serving a life sentence, although the possibility of parole does come up after 27 years have been served. The Yorkshire Ripper.
The similarities were there. There was no doubt this time that we had a serial killer on the patch.
He was born Peter Sutcliffe, but is perhaps better known by his moniker of the Yorkshire Ripper. This was a prolific British serial killer who targeted women and young girls. Some, but not all of his victims worked in the sex trade, and Sutcliffe was allegedly said to have, quote, heard voices that led him to commit these crimes.
We always went 2, 3 of you together. We knew we could be the next victim as easily as anyone else.
The Yorkshire Ripper prowled both Manchester and West Yorkshire during the mid and late 1970s, terrorizing the surrounding area for over 5 years. Sutcliffe was violent, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous, but he wasn't unstoppable. The Yorkshire Ripper was caught in 1981 and sentenced to life imprisonment with 20 concurrent sentences, eventually dying in custody on November 13, 2020.
What was really sad about Yvonne Pearson, and I think in a way underlines the sad lives that these women were living, was that her body wasn't found for several months after he killed her.
The Grim Sleeper.
And they said, can you describe him? He was a little short guy, black. He looked like a guy who just came out of Circuit City. He had a polo shirt and some khakis on.
It's unusual for the activities of a serial killer such as Lonnie Franklin to be so sparse and spread out over time. Yet the 14-year gap during which he was inactive led the press to dub Franklin the Grim Sleeper. Including that gap, his spree stretched from 1981 to 2007. A Los Angeles police investigation into early 80s sex worker slayings would eventually arrive at Franklin as a suspect.
Franklin was arrested last summer after DNA evidence allegedly tied him to 10 murders dating back 25 years, most of them black women from South Central LA.
He was accused of being responsible for some, but not all of the murders. Franklin was convicted on all counts, and the Grim Sleeper was officially sentenced to death. However, his lifeless body would be found in a cell before this sentence could be carried out. The cause of death remains unreleased.
All of these people have been suffering and will continue to suffer, but hopefully, as many of them said, they feel they're going to receive some peace, and I hope that you are able to leave here with some peace today.
The Green River Killer.
You find bodies dumped in this context, in this environment of a lot of extraneous material. What's evidence and what's not?
He was one of the most prolific serial murderers in United States history. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, was also perhaps one of the most unrepentant of his kind, an opportunist that preyed upon those in states of desperation and destitution. Ridgway possessed an obsession with sex workers that vacillated between disgust for their profession and a lust for their services. Yet the Green River Killer also allegedly held fast to his religious beliefs, resulting in an internal battle that seemed to rage constantly within him.
Green River investigators say Gary Leon Ridgway has long been at the top of their suspect list.
We ended our interview, allowed the attorneys to go in and interview him.
Ridgway's methodology was anything but swift, killing runaways and hitchhikers in a manner that helped draft the Green River Killer into the annals of Sick serial killer infamy.
The prostitutes were the easiest. I went from having sex with them to just plain killing them. The sight of them, for me, was like candy in a dish.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Dahmer placed the blame for the murders on his atheistic beliefs and the theory of evolution.
He said, if it all happens naturalistically, what's the need for a God? Can't I set my own rule?
The victims of Jeffrey Dahmer all retained a certain body type that seemed to attract the Milwaukee-based serial killer. Some of Dahmer's victims also worked in the sex industry, although this wasn't specifically what drew the killer to stalk his prey. The backstories of Dahmer's victims did allegedly influence the police investigation, however, a combination of ethnicity, sexuality, and occupation that resulted in a lot of clues slipping through the cracks.
After this all came out, several people in the bar said, I remember him. I remember. Well, of course we all did. Milwaukee's only this big.
Jeffrey Dahmer was given no less than 16 life sentences for his actions, but the killer barely served 3 years before he was murdered by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, on November 28, 1994.
Sir, we're under arrest for the attempted murder. The man out there, you have the right to remain silent.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Jack the Ripper.
It was here, in the early hours of the 30th of September, that the body of a woman would be found.
Her name was Elizabeth Stride.
The complete lack of solid answers continues to haunt historians who have studied the case of Jack the Ripper. This killer's true identity might not ever be known, but what is known is that he seemed to actively seek out victims from the sex trade. Jack the Ripper's methodology was clinically precise, but callous and deranged. He also sent taunting letters to investigators, missives with a perverse sense of pride about the Ripper's brutality.
Communicating with the public is not an unknown phenomenon with serial killers, because it makes them feel superior.
This ghost of eternal evil unfortunately lives on within the minds of many true crime enthusiasts. But perhaps we should focus more on those who were victimized by Jack the Ripper, rather than mythologizing a ruthless killer.
6 men died to bring it here from Egypt.
What are your thoughts about our collective true crime obsession? How does it affect us? And what does it say about us as consumers of media? Let us know in the comments.
She was cut up like a pig in the market. I've been in the force a long time. I never saw such a sight.